يا أيها الناس قد جاءكم برهان من ربكم وأنزلنا إليكم نورا مبينا.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. O Allah, open my heart, make my task easy for me, and remove the knots from my tongue, so they may understand my speech. So to recap the aims of each of the lessons that we're going to cover, we will look at the letter names and the phonetic sound of each letter and the articulation point of each letter, which in Arabic we call the Makhraj. For each letter, we will pronounce it with one of the three short vowels on, Fatha, Kasra, Dhamma, and we will also pronounce the letter with Sukoon, which means free from one of these short vowels. So every letter in the Arabic alphabet will either have one of the short vowels on them or a sukoon on them. And a letter which is empty in the Quran is also in the state of sukoon. So the sukoon can be visible or it can be completely empty, i.e. it can be invisible, so it's still in the state of sukoon. So we have another letter which is specific to the Arabic language and is not found in any other language. A letter Ayn, which is a letter name, and the phonetic sound is A. And this is one of the most difficult letters to pronounce correctly, especially for non-Arabs. And personally, this letter took me a lot of practice and dua, and having a good teacher who can listen to you and correct you is a very important factor. So letter Ayn shares its makhraj with Ha, which we've covered previously, A, Ha. So they both have the same articulation point, therefore they have to be differentiated in their characteristics. So the letter Ha is slightly further up compared to the Ayn. So you can see here, Ha, A is slightly further down to the Ayn, but still sharing the same articulation point. And you can also see that the Ayn, the epiglottis is pushed back further compared to the Ha. So Ha, A, Ah. So the epiglottis is pushed back further for the Ayn compared to the Ha, and you can also see that in the ligament area here, the blue ligament area, which is this ligament which sits between the epiglottis and the hyoid bone. So you can see here it's completely opened up, pushing back the epiglottis, and here it's not opened up as fully as it is with the Ayn. So in this area you can see the difference between the two letters. So what is the epiglottis? The epiglottis is a flap of tissue. It's a flap made out of elastic cartilage tissue covered with a mucous membrane and is attached to the entrance of the larynx. So it sits at the top of the larynx, either sits at the top of the throat. The epiglottis guards the entrance of the glottis, the opening between the vocal folds, and it points upwards whilst breathing. So you can see it's pointing upwards here. So it points upwards whilst breathing, and when swallowing, it falls to a horizontal position to close off the larynx, i.e. to prevent any food and water entering the windpipe and the lungs. And we can see this on the next slide. So on this slide, we can see the first thing that we can see on this picture is we can see where the epiglottis sits. So it sits beneath the tongue, or at the back of the tongue here, just underneath, at the entrance of the larynx, at the top of the throat, and at the top of the voice box. The voice box is here, where you can see the vocal folds. And here in the larger picture, these are the vocal folds, and this is the purple area, part is the epiglottis. So the epiglottis sits at the back, or just at the back of the tongue, where the tongue finishes, at the entrance of the larynx, at the entrance of the top of the throat. And in this video, so the purpose of this video is to show you the mechanism of using the epiglottis when we swallow. You can see how the epiglottis naturally closes off the entrance to the windpipe, so that food and water doesn't go down the incorrect passage, and it goes down the correct passage. So bearing this in mind, when we pronounce Ayn, we're doing a similar swallowing mechanism to push back the epiglottis towards the back wall of the throat. So this epiglottis here, we're pushing it back towards the back wall of the throat, but leaving a narrow passage between the epiglottis and the back of the throat and not closing off completely. If you close off the area completely, then the Ayn has a strangling sound, which is incorrect. And if you don't push back the epiglottis, then you have pronounced the letter Hamza, So it's a tricky letter where you have to push back the epiglottis, but not fully push it back, and you have to use the epiglottis area. If you don't use the epiglottis, then you pronounce the letter Hamza. Another key factor in pronouncing Ayn is to keep the tongue relaxed and make sure that we don't elevate the tongue. A common mistake is to elevate the tongue, making Ayn into a thick letter, So be careful, because we're pushing the tongue back, it's very easy to push the tongue, elevate the tongue as well. So keep the sound lowered, keep the tongue thin, and make sure we don't create any echo in the sound, and we don't elevate the back of the tongue when we're pushing it back. So it's like a piston movement where we're pushing back. So it's back, not up and back. So be careful you don't push the tongue up and back, but just back. Not oh. So how is the letter pronounced? So we said the letter name was Ayn, the phonetic sound was A. The articulation point is the middle of the throat, near the epiglottis area, and we can see that the tongue is thin and relaxed. There is no concaving in the middle of the tongue, and there's no raising of the elevation of the back of the tongue, so there's no echo sound. Even though we have a narrowing in the throat, but that's because it's the articulation point of the letter, which is why we're using the throat area, because the Ayn is a letter of the throat, similar to the Ha. So when it's found with one of the three vowels, Fatha, Dhamma, Kasra, A, Au, Ai. So be careful you don't say O. If I say O, then I've elevated my tongue and I've concaved my tongue. So make sure that we don't thicken the letter A, Au, Ai. And also make sure that it's not pronounced like a Hamza, A, U, E, which is incorrect. So you can see the shape of the letter when it's at the beginning. You can see the shape when it's in the middle, so it's filled in when it's in the middle. It's like an upside down triangle. And when it's at the end of the word, then it has its tail. So when it's in the beginning or the middle, then it loses its tail. So just remember the shape of the top part of the Ayn. And it's when it's with a sukoon, So we have a restriction. We have some restriction of the running of sound, and we have some running of sound. So it's a letter where some of the sound is restricted and some of the sound is allowed to run through. The reason being because we've narrowed this area, so we have a narrow passage where we have some restriction, but the sound is still running through with some restriction. So be careful when pronouncing this letter. So in this video, again, we can see how the tongue is pushed back to pronounce Ayn. So you can see this flap area which is opened up to push back. The next letter is Ghain, which has the same shape as Ayn. The difference is that the Ghain has a dot above the letter. The Ghain shares its articulation points with Kha, which we've previously covered. So they both share an articulation point, and they are articulated from the top part of the throat, where the soft palate meets the top of the throat. And you can see in the pictures, in the diagrams, that they're both elevated letters. So the sound is elevated, which results as a result of the back of the tongue being elevated. And you can see there's a concaving in the tongue, which results in a strong echo sound in the mouth. Kha, Gha. They have the same articulation point. The Ghain, the Kha is slightly higher, just a little bit higher than the Ghain. and the ghain is slightly lower. But again, they're both in the soft palate area of the throat. So kha, gha. And we will move on to looking at how they're pronounced with the vowels on them. So the letter name is ghain, and the phonetic sound is gha. So it's pronounced from the top of the throat near the soft palate. And it's an elevated letter, so we have an elevation of sound, elevation of the back of the tongue, we have a concaving of the tongue, we have echo in the mouth, and we have narrowing in the throat, resulting in a thick letter. And when it's pronounced with one of the three vowels, fatha, dhamma, kasra, gha, ghu, ghi. So you have to make sure that you have a strong echo sound in the mouth when you're pronouncing them. It shouldn't be gha, gha. And again, there shouldn't be any circling of the lips unless we're pronouncing it with dhamma. So the thickness needs to come from the mechanism on the tongue. Gha, ghu, ghi. And when it's pronounced with a sukoon, it's important that we differentiate it from the ha, so it doesn't sound the same, as they are both articulated from the same place. So with the ha we have we have the sound and the breath running, and with the ghain the breath is restricted and the sound is running l. So you can hear the difference between ha and ghain. L, which is ghain, and for the ha. So they need to be differentiated through the sifat. So to summarize the two letters that we've covered today, the ghain is a thick letter and an elevated letter. So far the elevated letters that we've had are kha, sad, dad, ta, and dha, which all of them are elevated letters, meaning that the sound is elevated, and they're also thickened letters. So there's a thickness in the tongue and a strong echo in the mouth. So gha, ghu, ghi. And Ayn is a thin letter. It's very important that we don't pronounce the Ayn with any thickness, especially because we're pushing the tongue back. So we have to make sure that we don't allow any concaving to happen in the tongue, and we don't allow the back of the tongue to be elevated as we're pushing it back, because we're pushing the epiglottis back. So care needs to be taken to keep the Ayn as a thin letter. A, O, I, not A. So be careful that we don't thicken the tongue for the Ayn. A, O, I. And when it's pronounced with a sukoon, be careful that you can hear the characteristics which occur in the letter. So in order to make the characteristics audible, the key is to stay on the articulation point until it feels as if the sound has finished, until all the characteristics have occurred. L, L. So at any point we wouldn't L. If you come off the articulation too quickly, then it would give the wrong characteristics. So for example, if we said L, then you would give a bouncing sound, a qalqala sound, which is the incorrect characteristic for the ghain. So the key is to stay on the articulation point until the characteristics naturally finish occurring. L, L. And for the Ayn, A, A, A. So it's very important that when the letters are with the sukoon, that we try and stay on the articulation point to allow the characteristics to occur. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. O Allah, glory be to you and all praise due to you. I bear witness that there is none worthy of worship besides you, and I seek forgiveness from you and return to you in obedience.
وأن أتلو القرآن فمن اهتدى فإنما يهتدي لنفسه ومن ضل فقل إنما أنا من المنذرين.